Okay, so I'm sitting here rewatching Abigail Shrier on Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson, and she keeps bringing up the fact that, okay, the subject is bad therapy and how putting kids into therapy prophylactically is problematic. And I'm inclined to agree with this because she makes the case that when we focus on the problems and we pathologize normal feelings and we ruminate over what's wrong, and we're told that because we have this thing wrong with us, we depend on others to get us through this life. It's incredibly damaging to anyone ultimately, but particularly children and teens who are still forming their sense of self and place and their map of reality. And this is really the conversation that they're having. But but it brings up for me the power of focus. And what we give our attention to is what shapes our reality and our experience and our ability to navigate that. And it's so important for us to be able to remember that where we put our focus, our feelings, our actions, our results are going to follow. And if we say we're sick and there's a thing that's beyond us, that's going to be our reality. And we're going to surrender, even inadvertently, our ability to do anything about it. We make ourselves helpless and dependent. And I can't think of a situation in which being helpless and dependent as an adult is in any way an advantage. I only see the liability in it, really. It's ultimately whatever good you get from it, it's a net negative because you're not going to be able to go forward and be an individual who's fully actualized and can deliver what it is we have to bring to the world. And this is another thing. We have a collective potential. And when individuals realize that potential, everybody gets the benefit of that. And so we're depleting those coffers of human possibility by telling people there's no possibility you can function because this thing happened to you, or you have this style of relating and it's who you are and it's permanent, and there's nothing you can do but talk about how that makes you feel, which will inevitably be ever worse based on the research that if you're just talking about the problems, you're not getting anywhere. Now, Chris Williamson makes a point in this discussion that a good therapist should be able to say, I hear that you're feeling this way. I can see why you might feel that way. Let's explore that. Is this really appropriate? Is this, you validate that, yeah, I get that this person's feeling this. I sort of see how they got there. But let's go deeper. Let's see if your emotional response is proportionate and appropriate given the circumstances, and help develop the emotional intelligence to know the difference between frustration and anger, for example. I think it was Abigail Shrier was saying something about the importance of that. Regardless, being able to help somebody develop emotional intelligence and apply the right words is part of it. Being able to validate feelings is part of it, but it's going to do more harm than good if we don't give people the ability to explore further and reality test that and develop strengths and skills, hatch a plan, and then develop the skills and gather the resources and build the abilities to go out and execute on that plan. If we're not doing that, we are basically just poking the wound with a sharp stick, and it's not going to heal that way. And so, yeah, I think that focus is a huge part of this. And when we are, whether it's in formal therapy with a trained clinician, or it's online, or it's with friends, or some other influence in our life where a person's playing counselor, it's really important that we take responsibility for what our mission, our purpose, our focus needs to be in that. And it needs to be more than connecting and feeling validated. It needs to be that that is toward us actually processing through the emotion, healing whatever damage around it, bringing in the resources, and again, building the skills and going out and applying them, that we see we can be effective in the world, and that we can have impact, and we are competent, and we can act autonomously as needed. Now, we need each other. We're not lone wolves out here, because there are plural of lone wolf. Anyway, we can't exist entirely unto ourselves. Too bad, because I love my solitude, and sometimes I wish I could just stay in solitude. But it's not realistic. I know I'm like anybody else. I need a balance. Everybody's balance may be a little different, but we need each other. So it's natural to reach out when we struggle and seek validation or some reflection that helps us understand. But validation, look, okay, I hear you're having the feeling. That's validation. I see that this is affecting you this way. That's all validation is saying, I see this. I'm with you. We're on the same page. But then what do you do about it? And I think this is where we go off track, because we're like, okay, let's talk about that. Let's give it a name. Let's say you are that thing. Let's say you need me to help you navigate because you're that thing. Where does that lead? Whereas if you focus on saying, look, everybody faces challenges in this life, and I see you're having a struggle with this particular issue right now. And what we can do is give those feelings some space, explore them, unpack them, and then from that, learn what it is we do need to lay out to get us forward. We need to be forward focused in these processes, or we're just walking in circles, wearing down the rug in a little loop. That's not healing. That's like one shade off from self-flagellation. It's really masochistic and unproductive if you just keep going and talking about your problems. And it's incredibly transformative if you really engage in the process of getting forward. I've talked about this before. There's a physiological shift that then, of course, our physiology and psychology being so intertwined will give rise to different thinking. It'll break the limiting beliefs we hold. It'll help show that we can overcome things that seem overwhelming and impossible at a time. It's important that we have the ability to go forward and just physically execute a thing in the world. And by putting our focus on how we're going to get forward, we can marshal our physiology to move us in that direction, which will almost immediately change the psychology, which will then support the physiology, that will support the psychology. It's one loop, and we need to keep it in balance with these different elements that comprise the whole. And breaking off little pieces and just doing the feel-good part isn't good. It's not kind, it's not helpful, and in many cases it's damaging. So yeah, I'm back around to talking about focus and being forward focused and finding out what our emotions are telling us about the course we need to plot and the steps we need to take to pursue that course, to end up where we do have a sense of competence and autonomy. And what is it? It's a sense of being a whole individual who can act independently and interconnectedly, and building all the things around that. And this is another thing Abigail Shrier was talking about. She's saying these kids don't have issues, they have bad lives. And it's so true. She and Chris Williamson got talking about how putting a child in therapy without making sure they're getting enough fresh air and physical activity, they didn't say putting the cart before the horse, but it is. That's basically the takeaway, is that we're not doing adequate. There should be a differential to say, are you depressed, or are you sad about this thing, or are you feeling sad because the way you're living isn't healthy and your body and your mind are trying to get that message across to you that there's something that needs to change. She also talked about the risk of deleting the signal of pain or discomfort where it's supposed to spur us to action. And when we go and we're like, we're just going to resolve the pain, you're taking away the impetus that allows us to make the change, that allows us to really become whole and healthy, functional humans with other whole, healthy, functional humans. And it's dehumanizing. It really is. I feel strongly enough about it to make the claim that it's ultimately dehumanizing, reducing somebody to a diagnosis, training them to identify with that, and then inducing a learned helplessness that makes them dependent on a system that they can't really rely on. What if your therapist retires? What if it's a school counselor and it's summer vacation? What if it's, a friend stepping into play counselor and now you have a rift and now you don't have that support? What do you do now? It's about planning for, well, okay. I remember watching a couple who homestead, and they've designed everything around the homestead according to what they call the weakest link. So they won't have a system that one of them is not capable of running. They will change the system so that if one of them is incapacitated, the other is more than capable of taking over and running the system. And I think we need to approach therapy and healing and all of these things with that kind of mindset of like, what if these things fall out? What am I left with? What can I do? And we talk about anxiety. I think I'd be terrified if I was that dependent on others to validate and guide me in all the little things. And this is another piece. I think we've lost sight of what the purpose of therapy is. Therapy is to heal damage around something, like physical therapy. You don't just go to physical therapy in case you get a shoulder injury, right? You go when you have the injury and you treat it, you resolve it, and you move on. That's what psychotherapy should be about as well. And instead we use it in place of close relationships. Sometimes it's just to feel like we've got someone there, and instead of going out and building real friendships, because that lonely feeling spurs us to connect, we end up becoming dependent on a therapist. And then what do we do when they need to take a sabbatical, right? Like, now we got to start working with someone else. And human relationships aren't interchangeable at that level, especially not in the intimate space of our psyches. So yeah, creating a program that allows us to, yes, be validated and explore and process and work through the stuff. Step one, great, but that needs to be toward creating these other conditions, analyzing how a person's living. What are we doing in our day-to-day that's supporting our health mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually, financially? In all these domains, as adults, we need to be able to mind these columns and keep a balance. And I think we all struggle with that. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but I think we all struggle to get all those columns in balance. And I would say working with somebody who could coach us through those things, working with a coach rather than a therapist, and saying, this is the challenge that presents, and this is how I'm feeling about it. Here's where I feel I can do things. Here's where I'm hitting roadblocks with myself or the circumstances, and be able to take that apart. Maybe the first thing is to actually get in and see if we can troubleshoot our life conditions, because I've experienced it and I've seen it for others, that when we change our conditions, we change in response to that. And this goes back to AA. That was one of the things. You got to change people, places, and things. Sit on the toilet sideways. Do everything different, because in changing that, it signals to those more unconscious parts of ourselves, look, it's a new chapter. We need to devise new strategies, and we need to be able to come at this from a different angle. And when we do that, we can really get leverage on these things that have had us stuck for a long time. And so, yeah, I think therapy is good if you really have a particular issue that needs resolution in that way. But I think making lifestyle changes with a coach is probably going to be a more effective approach. And if you don't have a coach, find a program, find a philosophy, find a group of people who are able to light the way with their own example and experience, and or are on that journey and are willing to work with you to fumble along and figure it out. If you don't have people to guide, find a group of people who are willing to explore together and support one another. There's so many ways to resolve these things that don't involve sitting with the therapist and ruminating until we fall into utter despair and helplessness. We are so much more powerful than this approach gives us credit for, or allows us to tap into and utilize. And I think that I meant to talk more about focus, and I'm talking about the problems of therapy here, but I think one of the key problems of therapy is how it diverts and in some cases perverts our focus. And without that, we're just looking into the darkness and believing that's all there is. Whereas if we can just pivot a little to where we can see the light, we can see the landscape, we can understand that there's so much more to it. And whichever way we get there, I hope that we can all pivot and see how much more is possible and how much more possibility resides within us, and how we do have the capability of shifting our focus and moving our lives into alignment with what we choose to focus on rather than that which we're told is the matter at hand. Because this is another threat. People will tell you what's wrong with you, and when we get a diagnosis, that's basically what a person's doing, is they're saying, well, this is what's wrong with you. You should identify with that. No, you identify with the fact that you are a complex organism in a complex environment doing your best. And what is most helpful in that is focusing on what can be affected and moved according to your wishes and your will. And in that, hopefully being able to enjoy an ease and a presence and a connection and a fulfillment that is not afforded to us by this other avenue of treatment. So, all right, here's to better ways forward. Thanks so much. I hope this helps. I look forward to seeing you in the next round. Take care.